From the heart of Chicago to the throne of Peter, it's not a story many would expect, but every vocation begins with a whisper. Welcome to the journey of Pope Leo XIV. If you're drawn to stories of faith, sacrifice, and divine purpose, we invite you to stay with us. This is more than a biography, it's a spiritual reflection. September 14, 1955. On a quiet street in Chicago's West Side, a baby boy was born to a working-class Catholic family. His name was Michael Joseph Leclerc. He would one day become Pope Leo XIV. The world he entered was post-war America. Catholic neighborhoods were filled with the children of immigrants. Churches were full. Rosaries were prayed. Life was modest, but rich in faith. Michael was the second of 4 children. His father worked for the Postal Service. His mother was a devout Catholic who never missed daily Mass. From his father, Michael learned discipline. From his mother, compassion. And from his parish church, he took his first steps in the mystery of God. As a boy, Michael wasn't the loudest or the most athletic, but he was attentive. And more than that, he asked different questions. He once asked the parish priest, "Why does God call some people to leave everything behind?" That question would stay with him for years. He served as an altar boy, sang in the parish choir, and walked the icy streets to early morning Mass. But more than routine, he began to sense something deeper. It wasn't just religion, it was relationship. In 1973, Michael enrolled at Villanova University. He was bright and chose mathematics as his major. It was a discipline of logic, of precision, of answers. But something in him remained open. He would slip into the chapel between classes. He read the writings of St. Augustine. He met with a spiritual director. Slowly, the quiet sense of calling grew. One professor remembered him saying, "Faith is not the opposite of reason. It's what gives reason a horizon." Michael's vocation was not born out of ambition, but of invitation. In 1977, he entered the novitiate of the Order of St. Augustine. He took the name Brother Michael Augustine. It was the beginning of a lifelong commitment to poverty, chastity, obedience, and the shared life of the community.
In 1981, he professed solemn vows. And in 1982, at the age of 27, he was ordained a priest. Looking back, he once said, "I wasn't looking for success. I was seeking surrender." 3 years later, in 1985, he was sent to Peru. There, he was assigned to the Diocese of Chulucanas, a remote region where many lived in poverty. He served as chancellor, helping with the administration of the diocese, but his real work was on foot, on horseback, in dusty villages, hearing confessions under trees, celebrating Mass in simple chapels, sharing meals with families who had none. He once said, "The gospel is not complicated. It's just hard to live without comfort." After 2 years, he returned to the United States in 1987, but not to rest. He became vocations director for the Midwest province of the Augustinians. He visited college campuses, gave talks at retreats, met one-on-one with young men discerning religious life. Many would say his calm sincerity helped them hear God's voice more clearly. He would often remind them, "God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called." In 1988, he returned to Peru. This time, he was asked to become the director of the Augustinian Seminary in Trujillo. He trained future priests, taught canon law, served as a parish priest, and worked as a diocesan judge. He didn't just teach theology, he shared life with the seminarians. He listened to their doubts. He challenged their pride. He reminded them that holiness was not perfection, but perseverance. By the late 1990s, Father Michael had become a trusted voice. Bishops consulted him. Religious superiors asked him to lead retreats, but he never sought recognition. He once wrote, "I never planned my next step. I just kept saying yes." From the frozen sidewalks of Chicago to the dusty fields of Peru, his life was already a testimony of obedience. But this was only the beginning. In the next chapter, the Church would call him to a global stage, to lead, to reform, and eventually to serve as the successor of Peter. If this journey has touched you, join us for part 2, where we explore how a humble missionary priest became one of the Church's most trusted global leaders. The story is just beginning.
Some people lead by title, others lead by trust. By the late 1990s, Father Michael Augustine was already the kind of man people turned to when they needed clarity, not noise. He wasn't famous, but he was steady. And in the life of the Church, that often means more. In 1999, he was elected Prior Provincial of the Augustinian province based in Chicago. For the first time, he wasn't just serving people in a parish or a seminary, he was leading a network of communities across the region. It was a role of oversight, mentorship, and vision. He was responsible for the lives of dozens of friars, for formation programs, for outreach missions, and for finances. It was the first time he had to carry both the weight of faith and the burden of administration. What stood out was not his ability to manage, but his ability to listen. When disagreements arose, he never rushed to judgment. When hard decisions had to be made, he would take time to pray, consult, and act with mercy. One friar later said, "You never felt afraid to tell him the truth, even when the truth was messy." 2 years later, in 2001, the Augustinian General Chapter in Rome elected him as Prior General of the entire order worldwide. He would now oversee Augustinians in more than 40 countries, from Africa to Asia, from Europe to the Americas. He was only 46 years old. For 12 years, he held that role, re-elected in 2007 for a second term. During that time, he visited nearly every continent, met with thousands of friars, navigated the order through cultural and spiritual challenges, and represented the Augustinians in conversations with the Vatican and with other religious communities. He didn't just speak about unity, he embodied it. But he never stopped being a missionary at heart. Even while based in Rome, he maintained close ties with the Church in Peru. The people had not forgotten him, and neither had the Lord. In 2013, when his term as Prior General ended, he returned again to Peru, this time with a new role waiting. In 2014, Pope Francis appointed him Apostolic Administrator of the Diocese of Chiclayo. That same year, he was named its bishop. At the time, Chiclayo was facing deep challenges. The diocese was large, under-resourced, and struggling to respond to poverty, corruption, and political instability in the region. Father Michael, now Bishop Michael, brought his calm presence to the chaos. He visited every parish, held listening sessions with clergy and laity alike, and focused on strengthening seminaries, youth outreach, and Catholic education. His episcopacy was marked by quiet but firm reform. He removed certain administrators who had lost the trust of the people. He invited new voices to the table: women, indigenous leaders, young adults. He didn't come with slogans. He came with sleeves rolled up. Between 2018 and 2023, he also served as vice president of the Peruvian Bishops' Conference. In a time of civil unrest, his voice was one of reason and reconciliation. When the streets were filled with protests and political anger,
He called for prayer, dialogue, and accountability. While others made headlines, he quietly built bridges. Then came another challenge. From 2020 to 2021, while still serving in Chiclayo, he was asked to serve simultaneously as apostolic administrator of the Diocese of Callao, one of the most complex urban dioceses in the country. It was an unusual request, but he accepted without hesitation. For over a year, he shepherded 2 dioceses, spending his weeks moving between cities, visiting parishes, meeting clergy, and ensuring pastoral care never stopped.
Those who worked with him during this time remember a man who rarely spoke about himself. He asked questions. He remembered names. He responded to conflict with silence first, then words. And in his homilies, he didn't preach at people. He spoke with them. In January 2023, Pope Francis brought him to Rome once more, this time as prefect of the dicastery for bishops. It is one of the most influential positions in the Roman Curia. As prefect, he was now responsible for identifying and recommending bishops across the globe. He reviewed dossiers. He consulted local churches. He prayed over difficult choices. His decisions would shape the church for generations. Some saw the appointment as a clear sign of trust from Pope Francis, a recognition of both his pastoral heart and his global experience. Others quietly wondered, could this be the man chosen to lead the church next? In September 2023, Pope Francis elevated him to the College of Cardinals. When asked about it, he simply said, "The red means blood, the willingness to die for the church. That's all that matters." He didn't seek the red hat, but it found him. By this point, Cardinal Michael Joseph Leclerc was no longer just a missionary or a religious superior or a bishop. He had become a global shepherd, someone who had seen the church from the inside and the outside, from the margins and from Rome, and more importantly, someone who remained rooted in prayer. Those close to him say that despite the growing responsibilities, he always started his day with silence, the liturgy of the hours, an hour before the tabernacle, a notebook in hand, but no agenda.
He once wrote in a letter to new bishops, "You don't lead with programs. You lead with presence. Be the first to arrive, the last to leave. Let people know that you belong to Christ, and then, maybe, they'll trust the church again." As 2023 ended, few doubted that he was among the most respected cardinals in the church. And then, everything changed. In early 2024, the health of Pope Francis began to decline. Whispers in Rome turned into quiet preparation. No one spoke publicly, but everyone knew a new chapter was approaching. Some began to speculate about successors. The media focused on younger, charismatic cardinals. But inside the college, many looked toward the man from Chicago, the man who never asked for any of it. His name was not shouted. It was spoken softly, in trust. And when the time came, the eyes of the world turned again to Rome. The story, however, was far from over. From dusty villages in Peru to the walls of the Vatican, this man had walked a path that no one could have predicted. But for those who knew him, it made perfect sense. In the final part of this journey, we will follow him into the conclave and witness the moment the world first heard the name, Leo XIV. If this story has moved you, join us for part 3, where the final chapter becomes the beginning of something far greater. This is the church. This is vocation. And this is only the beginning.
Rome was unusually quiet in the days leading up to the conclave.
The kind of quiet that doesn't mean nothing is happening, but rather that everything is about to. In the heart of the Vatican, 119 cardinals from every continent gathered. Each came with their own experiences, their own hopes, their own prayers. But they all came with the same responsibility: to elect the next Bishop of Rome. No cameras were allowed, no cell phones, no outside influence, only the Holy Spirit and their own consciences. For many, it was the most solemn moment of their lives. Cardinal Leclerc entered the Sistine Chapel like the others, robed in red, his expression unreadable. But those seated near him noted something about his posture. He wasn't tense. He wasn't distracted. He looked almost at peace. The first ballots were scattered. As is often the case, they revealed no clear frontrunner. Names emerged, then faded. Familiar voices from large dioceses, respected theologians, influential Vatican officials. But a quiet name kept appearing: Michael Joseph Leclerc. He didn't speak during the early discussions. He listened. When he was asked direct questions, he responded briefly, without drawing attention. When other cardinals expressed anxiety or uncertainty, he reminded them to pray. By the fourth day, the votes had narrowed. Leclerc's name had moved from the periphery to the center. Some hesitated. He was not part of any bloc, not European, not Latin American, not traditionalist, not progressive. He didn't fit the expected categories, but perhaps that was the point. On the fifth ballot of the fourth day, the smoke rose white. The bells rang. Crowds surged into St. Peter's Square, filling it with anticipation, tears, and flags from every corner of the world. Inside, the newly elected pope was asked the traditional question: "Do you accept your canonical election as supreme pontiff?" He answered with a single word: "Yes." When asked what name he would take, he paused. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he replied, "Leo. Leo XIV." The choice surprised many. It was a name not used for more than a century. Leo XIII had been a reformer, a bridge builder, a pope of encyclicals and diplomacy. In choosing that name, Cardinal Leclerc was not making a political statement. He was sending a message: the Church must return to its roots, not in nostalgia, but in renewal. That evening, standing on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, the world saw him for the first time. He was dressed in simple white, no elaborate gestures, no dramatic pause, just a quiet gaze over the crowd. Then he spoke. "Brothers and sisters, before I bless you, I ask that you bless me. Let us pray for one another and for the grace to walk humbly in the footsteps of Christ." It was not a long speech, but it did not need to be. Over the months that followed, Pope Leo XIV began his pontificate with three priorities: listening, healing, witness. He met with survivors of abuse before meeting with diplomats. He held listening sessions with young people before issuing new policies. He chose to live in a simple Vatican apartment rather than the traditional papal quarters. And he insisted that every major decision be preceded by prayer, fasting, and consultation with the peripheries of the Church. In his first encyclical, he wrote about the forgotten Beatitudes. Not just the poor in spirit, but the exhausted mothers, the silent caretakers, the abandoned elderly,
and the faithful who persevere without recognition. He called them the beating heart of the Church. He traveled not to capital cities, but to forgotten ones. In his first apostolic journey, he visited refugee camps in northern Africa. He washed feet in a prison outside Bogotá. He preached in a wooden chapel in Myanmar. In each place, he asked the same question: "What wounds do you carry, and how can the Church help heal them?" His style was slow, intentional. Some critics called him indecisive. Others said he lacked fire. But those who encountered him in person rarely left unchanged. In private, he rose before dawn. He wrote letters by hand. He continued to meet with the poor on Thursdays. He wept in confession, and he never stopped asking questions. When a young seminarian once asked him what it means to be a pope, Leo XIV smiled. "It means remembering that you were a sinner long before you were a priest. It means listening more than speaking. And it means never asking the people to carry a burden you wouldn't carry yourself." Over time, even the skeptical media began to notice something deeper. This was not a papacy of headlines, it was a papacy of healing. One cardinal remarked, "If Francis taught us to go to the margins, Leo is teaching us how to stay there." And in the eyes of many, that might be the greatest reform of all. In the third year of his papacy, he visited Chicago quietly. No public events, no speeches. Just a day spent in the church where he was baptized, and an evening in the same seminary chapel where he first felt the call to priesthood. He left a note at the altar. No one knows what it said, but a janitor who found it described it simply: a prayer of gratitude, nothing else. As of now, Leo XIV continues to serve, to listen, to kneel. There are no guarantees about what the future will hold, but this much is clear. His story is not about power, it's about presence. Not about command, but communion. From the streets of Chicago to the throne of Peter, he has carried one lesson with him: that leadership in the Church begins not with answers, but with prayer. And in an age of noise, that silence may be exactly what the world needs most. If this story has touched you, take a moment now to reflect, to pray. And if you feel moved, subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, leadership, and hope. Because the journey of the Church is not just in Rome, it's in every heart that still dares to believe. The story of Pope Leo XIV isn't finished, but then again, neither is yours. Let's walk this road together, one step, one prayer, one quiet miracle at a time.